Hello, everyone. It's time again for another episode of the Opinionated thoughtbotter. I'm your host, Svenja Schäfer, and team lead and developer here at thoughtbot. And my companion today, I'm not sure if that word exists, but I believe my companion today is Ferdia. Ferdia, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, happy to, Svenja. My name is Ferdia. I'm a senior product designer here with thoughtbot. Been here for nearly 5 years now, and I'm based in Dublin in Ireland.
So nice. I absolutely love Ireland. I mean, you know it. I am based in the south of Spain, but with the heat, I would happily switch to come over there. But we are not here to talk about my favorite things or where I want to live or spend my time. We are here to talk about your opinion, and I'm very excited about it. Fredia, what are we going to talk about? What is your opinion?
My opinion, Svenja, is that design is underrated.
Bold statement, Ferdia.
Yes.
What do you mean with design in particular? Is it the process or is it like as a final piece when you hand it over? What is it? What is underrated?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot, Svenja. It's quite a broad statement, first of all, because I think it applies to other industries, not just technology. Although I think it's quite prevalent in technology as well. And sometimes I feel like, and maybe this is obviously bias as a designer, but that, I think people maybe underestimate how much work goes into good design. As I said, not just in technology projects, but I think I said it to you before, but I studied architecture in college. So kind of a little bit of a similar experience there. It can sometimes be frustrating when people will, maybe believe an engineer that says this takes this long to do, or this is quite complicated, or a builder, in the physical space. But then if you're a designer or an architect or whatever, people kind of seem to think that that shouldn't maybe be the case as much. But yeah, sometimes it can feel like that. Sometimes people really get it, so I don't want to totally generalize, but I think it feels more accessible maybe to a lot of people than say writing code or actually laying bricks or laying foundations to a building. So I think that might be why it seems a little bit easier. But yeah, it can be a bit more tricky than that to do it well, I suppose.
Well, yeah, so it's more about the process, right? What takes so much time? And what is a lot of time, like, what do you think is, what do people don't get that
Yeah,
takes some time? Yeah.
good question, Svenja. I think probably the deviation maybe comes around say UI versus UX in a technical sense. So like I think a lot of people think of design as what something looks like. So it's very much kind of the visual aspect, and that's probably a little bit easier to have an opinion on. So a lot of people will come like, I like these fonts, or I like these styles, or I like so and so app because I like the way that kind of works. And similarly, again, in other spaces, like if you're designing homes or whatever, a lot of people will look on Pinterest. They find kitchens they like, they find living rooms they like, those kind of things. So I think that's probably what a lot of people think design is. But I think that's like the final touch on it, like the kind of the styling. If you were to have something, an app that functions well, or a building that flows well, there's a lot more work involved in kind of the problem solving side of it rather than the styling side of it. And I think that can be underestimated sometimes. So what we do a lot with clients in Thoughtbot is you're not just designing the screens of the app that you want to use, but you're taking business considerations into account, maybe the strategy of where they want to grow. You might have to have some flexibility so that there's room for growth there. So you're maybe not making the best design for right now, but you're thinking about in 6, 12 months time, how are we going to scale it and from here. So there's a lot of those kind of considerations that go in and probably either don't get seen, or maybe as designers we don't do a particularly good job showing them or demonstrating them. And maybe that's why it's a little bit underrated. So you end up with this kind of nice looking design. I think a lot of people think, that shouldn't have taken that long. It kind of looks like maybe the screenshots that I sent or the the Pinterest photos that I'd saved. But really, under the hood, there's a good bit of work that's gone into making sure it functions well and can look like that rather than just look like that.
Yeah, I think a very important aspect is the conversations that need to happen continuously. Yeah, continuously. So because you always have to say, okay, this is what I'm working on, and just like to keep the client and everyone on the project involved, right? Because if you're just like hiding behind, for example, in Ireland, I'm in Spain, and I don't know what you're working on because all I see very often, like it could be the final result, and then I just like, but what steps did Ferdia take to reach that result, right? So I do think, yeah,
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 and even on that, like even if you just focus on the visual side of things, like even without going into say user testing and like really working on the UX and trying to bring in business goals and stuff, which we can talk about a bit later if you want. But like even just on the UI side of things, um, what I found helpful in the last couple of years is something I actually used to do in college, for architecture. Um, what we would often do there is like if you're going through iterations of a design, you just put down sketching paper basically over the floor plan or over whatever, and you draw a variation, and then you put another piece of sketching paper down, you draw another variation, and you go through an awful lot of those. You would actually submit those with your final projects that you can see. It's kind of like the workings, I suppose, like in a maths paper, like show how you got to the answer. And I think that's probably something maybe as designers we need to work on a little bit as well. Or I know I've been trying to work on that, which is try to show how you got there. So I found, or something I found helpful on client projects recently is if we're kind of doing some UI work, if I'm touching base, the next day or later on in the week, to kind of show where I've got to, I'll always try to include those, 10, 20, 30, 40 iterations of the same thing, and just structure them a little bit so like that they can see them all laid out. Because I think it's hard for people to know what you considered if you don't show it to them.
yeah. That brings me to, or I had the thought because in product design sprints we also do that, and we involve the client heavily, right, in the design process.
Mm.
And do you think that's better when we, for example, do the PDS?
Definitely, for say first time founders or people that maybe aren't used to the process, Svenja, I think that's a really really useful tool. I've often found as well with product design sprints that we might have founders or kind of or people like stakeholders in a particular project, and after day one or day two they're kind of like a little bit like, why are we doing this? I know what I want to build, I know how I'm doing, but then when you get to day five they're like, oh, I get it. Like I see why we did that. I see why we went through that process, and that's really satisfying and rewarding. And yeah, I think once you've kind of done that kind of thing once with the client, they tend to be more on board with it, or they have a bit more of an insight into what goes into it. Because again, you could look at the output of a full product design sprint, a 5 day full sprint, and you're probably going to see a prototype, and it looks semi polished, and it's a singular kind of flow. You might think, oh, that shouldn't have taken that long, but again, yeah, if they've been part of that process, the ideation and the kind of uh, trying to come up with as many possible solutions as you can, and then converging on one, like, yeah, it's definitely good to involve people more.
Yeah, involvement and ongoing conversations, right, is what
Mm.
might help to bring the or to highlight the importance of design and how much it takes, like, yeah, see what you're working on. And because if you don't know, if you never had any touch points with a designer, it's really tricky to really understand how does the workday look like
Mm.
for a designer, right?
Yeah.
Or how's the thought process, etc., etc. By whom do you mostly, or do you believe design gets underrated? Was there ever a time that a colleague, might be in a previous company,
Yeah.
okay, that a colleague or a client underrated design?
Um, to be fair, I don't think so on thoughtbot anyway. I'll say that. I think we work so closely as a team. We're always cross functional, and very collaborative. So yeah, it's never really happened in thoughtbot. I would say probably the most commonplace will be just people that aren't maybe familiar with it. So as I said, maybe first time founders, or people that maybe come from a non-technical background who have never maybe like even seen the development process. So you know how we try to release things, break things down, and iterate on them. That's a similar enough process to design. So I think it's probably, yeah, people just that haven't really seen the process in action are probably most likely where that could be. Could be a colleague, could be a client, could be someone that you're mentoring, could be anyone that just doesn't quite have that experience or that exposure to what it takes. And then yeah, again, it's our job to show them that and to show them kind of why it's important, and to yeah to explain it all.
I have to say, I have a design background, right? In 2001, I think, I did a education or a study, graphic design, and eventually I did Bachelor of Professional Media Engineering. It's called, super fancy, but yeah, I did not learn so much about the design during the bachelor, but something that always bothered me, and even back then, I mean, it's been a couple of years now, was that no matter how thought about myself that I did a great job, like in like learning lots about design patterns, like in the design system, not on coding side, right? Because now I'm a developer, but there were always people who thought, well, I can do it as well, and that kind of bothered me. And I felt like, well, my work is really not valued as much as it should. And I feel and fear that it's even worse now with AI, but I don't want to move it to an AI conversation completely. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good shout as well. And you actually touched on a couple of points. So like one of them, just around the university thing, and getting a qualification in it. I think that maybe specifically in technology is something that's maybe makes it a bit harder to get that sort of that buy-in from people. So like just to give you an example, if you're a doctor or something, like say a cardiologist, you know, I would never go and see a cardiologist and assume I can do what they do because they've got qualifications. They're kind of like, board certifications, that kind of thing. Um, I think in design, it's probably a bit more like the Wild West. Like I know there are courses out there, the graphic design courses and that kind of thing. But I think possibly they're not as structured. Like I said, I did architecture and I've ended up in product design, and that's through a lot of kind of smaller things. But there are no sort of official, I suppose, official courses or like a registered body or anything. Um, I do think that's something that will help certain professions with the AI age. So if you're a registered civil engineer or a registered doctor and you're signing off on things, that that kind of gives you a certain amount of protection, and a certain amount of value people are willing to pay for your sign off. So I think probably the university education part is maybe one thing that kind of lends itself to being a little bit less valued. Um, and then yeah, it can be frustrating if people feel like they can do what you did if you ended up putting a lot of work into it. I think a lot of design is subjective as well. So like you'll always have some people that like it. Hopefully you get 80% that like it, but there'll always be some people that don't. I think you're just kind of playing for the majority there. Um, and like I think one thing that's kind of on a bit of a tangent, but um, I often think like if let's say if you're in a scenario, Svenja, and the client says, "No, I could have done that. Like we don't need a designer here." I I I think down the road, in 3 months' time or 6 months' time, they might need to make a change, and they're gonna make some kind of a visual change, but they haven't maybe considered the implications of that. So yeah, they might end up changing something that I fixed that problem, but they've actually changed how the navigation works or something like that. If again going back to the building analogy, it would be kind of like if you were in your house and you wanted to have an open plan kitchen and sitting, and there's a wall in between them, I don't think really anyone would just go and knock down the wall themselves without consulting an engineer to see if it's load bearing, because the house might come down. Um, but I people do that a bit in design, and I think oftentimes, like, we might have even seen it in thoughtbot, where people end up coming back to you and looking for a fix for it. Um, so yeah, sometimes it can be frustrating if people don't value it first time, but I think, or I hope, they see the value in future when it's not there. And again, like, good design, you don't really notice it, but bad design, you do. So
That's so true. Yes. It's just like, and design is not, as you said, it's not only what you see, but also how you experience a website, an application. Like, is it really intuitive, right? Is it intuitive? Like, I mean, when you have a not so nice checkout flow, people won't buy your product. And it's just like, because it's does not feel safe, it does not feel secure. And if you would only place developers on it, yeah, it won't be enough, right? I
100%,
mean,
Svenja. And like, even I know some of our colleagues there. I saw a message a couple of weeks ago about a UX change they made for a client, and like, it resulted in, I don't know, was it 20,000 extra dollars in revenue, or something. Again, just when you mentioned the checkout flow, it made me think of it, because like, that is the kind of impact that good design can have. But again, it's kind of, you kind of see it when it works. But if it's not working well, you don't even realize what you're losing, maybe, from it. So yeah, it's an interesting one to try to show the value.
yeah, I mean, it's, yeah, yeah. Sometimes you don't, yeah, as you said, sometimes you don't realize that it's bad design, but that just highlights the importance of getting designers from day one on a project. So, because yeah, it won't lose you money, but it also won't, you won't get more money with your product, right? Without a designer. Ferdia, do you have an app or something that you absolutely hate, or you don't, that you don't like? Not from a design perspective, maybe, because, well, yeah, we don't want to bash any applications from a design perspective, but that just like promotes underrating design.
Yeah. It's a yeah, that's a very good question. So first of all, I'd say I try to keep my apps minimum. I don't use that many. Um, I will say there are some things that I've seen out there that I think use sort of dark design patterns, so they're deliberately maybe making it a bit confusing. I think Ryanair do that, and I do like Ryanair, but they're always like, one button will be bright yellow, and that's the continue next, and like the add extra bag will just be a text button at the bottom, and the next page they'll have it switched around, and I don't like when apps do that. I understand why they're doing it. I think Amazon do it a lot as well. Sometimes it can be hard to know, um, yeah, to cancel, say, subscriptions, that kind of thing. They make it quite tricky with sort of dark design patterns. So those would be probably some apps that I'd be less keen on, in terms of the design.
Yeah, but like, what I more meant was, so I do agree. Sometimes it's really tricky. So personally, what I find really confusing is using online banking,
Mm,
when you have only 7 minutes. I mean, 7 minutes is a lot, but when it's not really accessible, right? And
mm,
I do feel like good design should be accessible. And you have 7 minutes, and then you need an SMS. You receive an SMS that you have to type in. And you also have to log in into your online banking to approve it, and all just because you want to buy something new. But what I more meant, was, is there an app that makes it so easy for someone to use and to get a result, no matter if it's good or maybe not so good, that just like underrates design even more? So people just like, because when I believe when people lose the idea that design is actually work, and not just like clicking something and they generate, right? So I'm not sure if there exists these kind of applications or apps. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Svenja. On like, I think on the banking point, actually, in some maybe it's the opposite actually of the question you asked. But I think one that has caused maybe an increase in design or in standards would be the likes of, just when you mentioned banking, but the likes of Revolut or some of those. Like, I know nearly everyone in Ireland is seems to be using Revolut at the moment, and like functionally they're not doing an awful lot different to what a bank can do. In that, like, you can send money to people and you can receive money, and like it's kind of the same, but the UX is so much better on Revolut. Like, the transfers happen instantly, and I know there's technical stuff there as well. Like that they're technically, from a technical standpoint, it's a better application than a lot of the actual banking apps. But they kind of pushed it to become so easy to transfer and just make the process seamless, that I've actually seen my own, like, normal bank have just released a kind of a new thing where they've teamed up with some other banks in Ireland, basically to try to compete with it. Because yeah, they've obviously felt the business impact. So that's probably, yeah, it's probably the opposite to your question, but I think those kind of
I love that.
ones are, yeah, they're really pushing other people to invest in design because theirs is so good and so easy to use. Again, not just UI, it's the whole UX of it. It's so easy. There's no time, or not the same kind of timeouts. Yeah, everything just happens really easily. I can send money to a phone number and not have to get an IBAN and a bit code, and have max limits on a certain day and all that kind of thing. So yeah.
I love that. So maybe that would be an idea, just like how to not underrate design. And just like, I mean, there's this saying, I'm not sure if it exists in English, but in German it does. Do something good and speak about it. So when there are more positive and like applications where design is everything, like when you said it was Revolut, I'm obviously not with Revolut because otherwise I wouldn't say that. But yeah, just like produce more well working products
Mm,
and speak
mm.
about it, so that every other company needs to follow. What
So
else could we do?
yeah, it's a great show, Svenja, and like that's just an example, I suppose, of using it as a competitive advantage nearly. That, and I think, like, there might be some industries where there's a standard pattern and maybe that's working fine, but if you can kind of come in and just make it next level easy or next level enjoyable to kind of use an application, it really can have a business impact and get you a return on investment there. So yeah, I was even thinking, like, the RTE Player app, obviously not a technology company, they're kind of state broadcaster in Ireland. But like, if you compare it to Netflix, to how well Netflix functions, obviously very different market, billion-dollar company competing with a state broadcaster. But like, again, it's not necessarily the look of it, but how it flows is just so much easier on Netflix versus the RTE app. And again, even I think you can compare, like, Amazon and Netflix, or Prime and Netflix. Like, I think I, I think I remember looking at and comparing the two before. I find Netflix a lot easier to use. Maybe not everyone's the same. Um, uh,
What about HBO?
don't
Now that's
I don't have a Spanish, so I've never looked around it. But like, sometimes I think, like, Amazon, Netflix really went hard at, like, the discoverability thing. So you're kind of, and then maybe this is a kind of turning into a negative, that people are spending so long looking for something to watch, but that it was a lot easier to kind of explore content. Whereas Amazon, at least last time I kind of had a subscription for it, was more, I think it was more search based, which is maybe a bit of a legacy from the Amazon website, where you might be kind of searching things. So rather than kind of like just natural discoverability. So I felt like, yeah, Netflix were doing a better job, and that's going to have a business impact. If you can more easily discover content that you like, it's going to be more beneficial for you, and you've made it easier for someone to do that. So they're going to keep a subscription there for one and not for the other. So yeah, it can be a
So
competitive advantage if you use it well.
it's a fun fact. On the weekend, I cleaned up my office and I found, so I'm a bit older. I cleaned up my office and I found video cards, like where's the times where you had to go to a shop to borrow, rent DVDs. Oh my gosh, I miss that. So
It
it just
was a
makes
lot of
so
fun, to be
well.
fair. Yeah,
Good.
yeah,
Oh, design on a completely different level. But I really miss going into these shops. And then, I mean, even there, it's design. Do you find the video, the movie you want to watch, and the snacks you want to eat along the way? And
100%,
that's really
Svenja. And
important.
like, if you're talking about physical space, like I know IKEA do it an awful lot with their shops. Like they're like it's like a maze, and it's like that on purpose because it's trying to help you discover things that you will like, maybe that you don't need, but that that you'll ultimately buy. And the same again, my architecture background and a lot of my friends that still work in the industry like would say that the build it's not like good design is not necessarily the tiles you've picked or the color you put on the wall. It's like how does the space work? How am I walking through? Does it work for my needs? And yeah, I so then what you're talking about, going into a shop and figuring out this is where I go and this is kind of what I want to see and this drives me to a certain direction and it it drives me to a certain action maybe in the case of IKEA. So yeah, I think that's all important and as I said, a little bit underappreciated because sometimes you don't even realize that it's there because it's flowing so seamlessly. But like if there was a big wall in the middle of IKEA that stopped you from going from one side to the other, you would notice it, because that would be bad. That would be bad design. So, the good one just can kind of flow, and the bad one, I think is quite noticeable.
Love it. Yes. So invest in good designers. Talk to designers. Talk to clients as a designer. Keep them updated. Keep them, yeah, give them updates on the work. Involve them in the process. I think that's that's super important. Also, maybe telling and showing them what the impact of good design is. Like you said, like if there's a wall, um, say that. Like if there would be a wall, if you would not be able um, to find whatever, it not only means like that it might be trickier, a product might be trickier to use for the user, but there also might be legal consequences, right? I mean, if you don't have the um, how is it in English? The privacy, what's it called? Agreement on your website.
Yeah, yeah, like privacy policy.
Yeah, privacy policy. I do think it needs to be reachable with 2 clicks or something like that. At least it was years ago like that.
Mhm.
You have to implement it without it being a disturbance. So all that are design decisions, and not everyone can design. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
and I think like it's important to have. Well, again, obviously I'm biased, but I do think it's important to have someone to advocate for those things because sometimes if you don't have a designer on your team, often the quick fix will be, oh, well, we'll move that button or we'll change that navigation or we'll put something else in here, and yeah, that'll solve it for now maybe, and it's a patch, but again down the line, if you do that continuously, you're going to reach a point where you're going to have an expensive redesign of the whole system. If you had somebody in there from the beginning who can advocate for them and say, well, actually that's not the best change, it's a very short-term approach, maybe we actually need to change this component and that gives us the flexibility to scale up or whatever it might be. um, I think having an advocate for that again can save companies in the long run. It's a bit like technical debt or legacy code, that if you keep going with it for a certain point, at some point you're going to have to make a big change and it's going to be expensive. So it's kind of the same with design.
Yeah. Love it. Good finish point, I think. Did we miss something to talk about? Do you want to say anything? If not,
No,
no.
that's it, man. That's my rant.
No. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed it. I always love talking about design and rant about it as well. So I'm here to rant. If you also want to rant, leave comments. And see you next time. Bye bye.
Thanks, Svenja. Bye bye.